Hospital Porter's pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Hapanwo TV. Well, I'm off on another adventure. Yeah, this time it's a working trip. I'm going to be speaking. I'm actually going to two, so we'll do them one at a time, shall we? The first one I'm going to is the Dorset Earth Mysteries Group, and I'll be speaking there, and so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it now. And this is the event I'm going to be speaking at, the Dorset Earth Mysteries Group. It's been around a long time, formed in 1998. Surprised I've never heard of them before. But here we are, Roswell Rising, Emlyn-Jones. This is not just a promotional thing for my book, but I have actually come up with a brand new talk for this. But it says here, Emlyn-Jones is a former hospital porter and an independent journalist who over the course of his life has come to realise that subjects most people laugh at, like UFOs, the paranormal and government cover-ups, are real. Not only are they real, they're the most important issues affecting the world today. Gaining an understanding of them has become a necessity. Ben is the author of the books, and etc, etc. And Hapanwo UFO Truth magazine. So that is the basically where I'm going to be. And I've never been to these people before. I'm never even heard of them until recently, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Other way round, that's it. Okay, I'm having a little cup of coffee. I've actually got here quite early in town, like I tend to do. Be prepared, as the hospital porters say. And I'm having my morning cup of coffee here in the Gloucester Green Market. Now, I've decided to go to this place here, the Cafe Vespa. If you are a cash fanatic like me, this is about the only place, one of the few places in Oxford city centre you can actually get a cup of coffee. I've been into the Black Sheep Coffee Company on George Street, and I've been to the Cafe Nero. Neither of them take cash. They are cashless. And I asked the guy behind the counter in the Black Sheep Company, I said, look, are you planning on going, what's this, how come you don't take cash? How come you stopped taking cash? He said, none of our branches take cash. And he said, it's the usual thing, it's the pandemic, we don't want to spread bacteria. I said, okay, well, the lockdown restrictions are over now. Are you planning on going back to using cash anytime soon? And he said, no. And this has been a recurring theme that I found. This has been a recurring theme that I found wherever I go. I asked that question, are you going back to using cash anytime soon? They said no. None of these businesses that have gone cashless during the pandemic have any plans to go back to using cash. For those few of you who read Hapanwo Voice, please do check it out, because a couple of days ago I wrote an article called Cashless Street. It's about a place in the posh part of Chelsea in London where you literally there's not a single business, not a restaurant, not a pub, not a grocer, nowhere that takes cash. I don't have to reiterate the problems I have with that, I really don't, but this is probably only going to continue, and that's worrying. So I'm off to a bit of a bad start for this particular trip, but there's my coffee. If you're in Oxford, where you know where to go, if you love cash and you want to go somewhere where you can make a private financial transaction with the retailer, go to the Cafe Vespa here in the Gloucester Green Market, because that's your only option now, I think. So support the businesses that use cash, I say. Hi gal, I've arrived now in Bournemouth. I'll show you a little bit of the place here. Can't see very much at the moment, but I've just got here. I have actually been here before once. It was a very long time ago. It was actually a trade union event. It shows how long ago it was. I was in my late teens. I was 18 or 19. I just started out in hospital portering. And I came here, and I remember quite well. We went to a hotel, and there was some kind of, I think we were lobbying the Labour Party or something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, I'm back again, and after all these years, and now what I've got to do is I've got to get myself to Weymouth, which is where I should have gone anyway on the coach, but the coach actually terminates here, so I don't know if it would have been easier or more difficult. I've got to get to Weymouth, and I'm going to, from there, I'm going to meet up with a friend. I'm going to find my way to the venue. It's plenty of time. It's only 1:30, so literally it's more than 6 hours until the event begins, so I don't have to rush around. But to get to Weymouth, I'll have to use the train, so I've got to find my way to the railway station. I think that might be it over there, actually. So I'm going to head off. You may be noticed I'm wearing my very appropriate hat here. This Roswell 75 Years of Secrecy baseball cap, which I, of course, if you remember, if you're a regular viewer, I bought in Blackpool at the Awakening Expo. And I've got my very suitable disclosure t-shirt, because tomorrow is, of course, World Disclosure Day. 75 years since Roswell, so I'll be making a big deal about that, you can be sure. So I'm just going to give you one look at these nice little things. Those beach hut kind of things are what Bournemouth's famous for, actually. And there you go, nice paintings by a Dorset artist, Richard Watkin. Right, there you go. Very nice they are too. Well, it didn't take too long, luckily. I literally went into the railway station. It had there was no one behind the counter for the ticket office. They just had these automatic self-service things which I can't stand. Luckily, they weren't cashless, so I managed to get on the train very quickly. I'm now on my way to Weymouth, where I'm meeting up my friend. I don't know how long it's going to take. But anyway, I'm on there, so I'm reading good old FT anyway, which is always a good thing to pass the time. So I'll let you know when I get there. The beach, nice. And there's our first seagull I've seen. There you go, coming here to meet me. Okay guys, I'm in Weymouth. This is a place I have been to before. I came here on a birthday outing when I was a little kid, and I'm back again. This south coast I really haven't had much to do with in my life, but I'm here again now, and it's a beautiful area actually. This south coast area, but you know I hardly ever travel in this direction. But I'm here now. Now I'm just waiting for a friend, who's going to come and meet me. So. He shouldn't be long. I must apologise actually, because I didn't film something I should have earlier, because when we left Southampton on the coach, when we went to Southampton, I didn't film much of the coast journey because I thought, well, you've seen so many of those before. We went through the New Forest, and it's an amazing sight. It's an open, desolate area of pasture, woodland, which is really quite like something I've rarely seen. It wasn't unlike the Pennines, it wasn't as hilly, but it was rather like the Pennines. And I didn't film it, so I'm sorry about that. Okay guys, just going to wait here for a little while until my friend turns up. But this is at Weymouth. Well, part of it anyway. Okay, well I've arrived, I'm actually at my friend's house now. I'm in this lovely room, which you'll be familiar with if you know me and you know my friends on Facebook. It is a nice little Indian totem pole there, and there is on this side a dream catcher. Yeah, and I'm sitting. It's a little conservatory, sort of summer house in the garden. So that's really nice. Yeah. So wow. Oh yeah, he turned up quite soon after I got to the station, which is quite nice. It's actually pretty hot today. It's actually quite hot weather. So. Unfortunately, I'm not going to have a chance to go down to the beach, but because this is a working trip. But I'm going to, I'm still going to enjoy the nice weather out here anyway. And here I sit here. That's nice in the corner there. And that is a lovely candlestick. Yeah, wonderful. I actually had the opportunity to spend the night in this little room. They did offer me, my friends. They did offer me a bed for the night, because obviously I have to spend the night and then head off to Base's project tomorrow. But as it happened, my friends from Wales have sorted something else out for me, so that's what I'll be doing next. That's where I'll be going instead, after my event at the Earth Mysteries group. So, lovely garden, lovely area here. I can tell you, my friend is actually Neil Geddes-Ward.
Hello everybody.
You'll know Neil if you're a regular viewer. He's been on many times. So we're sitting in Neil's little summer house, which is very nice.
Which I inherited from my dad.
Yeah. If you follow Neil on Facebook, you'll recognise this room because you've posted some pictures.
Actually, I don't think I did on Facebook.
Didn't you?
Yeah.
Oh right, I thought I saw some. Maybe you sent me some in my inbox.
Maybe I sent some privately ones. Yeah, this is the summer house.
I hope you don't mind it being on
no.
TV. Oh, cool.
It's the summer house that it wasn't a planned summer house for this place. It was just one of those things that was serendipity, I guess. That my father died back in April, and he lived in a housing association house. So if we hadn't collected it from there, it would have been junked by the housing association. So we quickly did a rescue mission. Sorry about the noise.
Oh, they're cutting the grass in the field next door.
Yeah. I wish they would have rung me. I never got the memo. But yeah, probably getting stones flying over now. Meteorites from space. Maybe better do that one again. I don't know.
But you got this from this was originally your dad's place.
And unfortunately he never actually got it completed. He got it partially completed just before he died, and we were all planning to go and descend on his place in the summertime, to have a little party and sort of like welcome his new summer house, and he never got it fully completed. So we've managed to get it down here to Dorset, and we've I put a carpet in it, and which we again rescued from his place, and we've got a few bits of furniture from Monica's place here, and we put that in, and yeah, we don't want to put a TV or anything like that. It's just like a little chill out room. Of course, when there's not people cutting the lawn behind you.
Oh, yeah. It's a lovely little. It's got some nice books here. Though. These books, it's almost like a kind of. It's almost like a kind of what's the word? A sanctuary kind of meditation
room. When there's no lawnmowers at the back, you can. Yeah, I mean, we've been finding that we've been drawn to sit out here. Like, oh, this is nice, let's come and sit out here. We never thought we'd have a summer house or anything like that, so it's really nice to have this.
It's lovely. It's like, did you have to dismantle it at your dad's place?
Yeah, thankfully through the help of some very fortunate friends of mine that you know well as well, Matt and Mena.
Oh yes, the High Wycombe Paranormal group.
Yeah. They very kindly assisted us dismantling it from there, because I've never assembled a summer house or even dismantled one before. And Matt, I knew from experience, had made his own summer house at the back of their place, which we've used for interviews, of course.
Yeah, that's right.
So he kindly came along with Mena, and in about 2 hours, the whole thing was just panels against the wall of the house. We managed to get the whole thing sorted using his experience and everything. And then we left it there for a week whilst I was sorting out a way of getting it down to Dorset. And in the end, I was going to use various haulage companies, but they all kept pulling out and saying, oh no, I don't think we can handle that. So in the end I bit the bullet, and I hired a 3.5 tonne van, went up with my girlfriend and her brother-in-law, who also knows about summer houses, and we drove all the way up to Buckinghamshire, picked it all up, put it in the van, and about a week later, after we got it here, brother-in-law came round, and we spent the day assembling the whole thing up here and everything, using his expertise. So again, I was the guy that was just holding everything up for him, and he put all the screws in and things like that. So I'm not going to try and take credit and say, look, I put this up. I didn't. I assisted. I was like the apprentice summer house assembly person.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, that's really good. You obviously together as a team, you did a good job here, because
it's definitely a two-man or two-person job putting these things up. You definitely need someone to hold the wall steady while you screw the screws in, and someone to hold the roof on whilst that's screwed in and stuff like that. So it's not one of those things you can do by yourself. It's definitely a two-person at the minimum, and we managed to do it really, really quickly. And it's come together, and we're really, really pleased with it.
Oh, cool. It is really nice here, Neil. Yeah, it's really cool. And well, you're coming tonight to the Dorset Earth Mysteries Group.
Dorset Earth Mysteries Group, where you will be doing a presentation, I believe.
I will, yeah. So Neil's very kindly offered to do his own version of the filming, which is I always appreciate, because to be honest, I'm not quite sure exactly how well it's going to be. It's always a bit of a gamble. I have my handheld equipment, which I bring with me on the train, and so Neil has a full setup though. So hopefully he'll produce a better quality version than I will. In fact, he almost certainly will. He's got a tie mic, things like that. But yeah, this is a working trip for me. I'm always getting a little bit sort of jittery when I'm going to go on stage. I want to do a good job, but these people seem very nice, and
they're very sweet people. I did a talk back for them back in the winter, and that's where I mentioned Ben and said I know a great guy who can do a good talk for you guys, and so they said, yeah, put us in touch. So that's what this has culminated in now. So I've also gonna put them in contact with maybe Ronnie and Philip Kinsella, who might want to come down next year and do a talk for. There's a group here in Weymouth called Weymouth Spiritual Centre, which is basically a kind of spiritualist church type of thing. And maybe Philip could do something there and also a presentation there. I've offered to do a presentation for them too. And I will be going back to Dorset Earth Mysteries later this year, perhaps in the winter, and I will do a follow-up talk called Mooring Hounds with various ghosts and spirits. So I'll be doing that one.
Oh, well, no, thanks very much for recommending me to them. This thanks to Neil, this has come about. So, well, I'm a bit early, so we've got plenty of time to wait, but that's fine with me. It's nice. It's a nice afternoon, so I'm not in any rush. Well, ladies and gents, you'll be very, very impressed with the view from the house. This is where Neil lives, and it's a lovely, lovely location. That over there is Portland, and there's a naval base there, and you can see there's a kind of radome. Do you see the radome? Apparently there's a prison up there, and Gary Glitter's in there. And this is Chesil Beach here, where they tested the bouncing bomb. And look at the sea, how blue that is. That is absolutely lovely. And over there's the other side, because of course it's a peninsula. And it's a gorgeous I know, I imagine like it depends on the weather. I mean, some days are better than others, but this is a perfect day to come here. Blue sky, no chemtrails, just hardly any clouds, and a beautiful blue sea. Absolutely fantastic view. Okay, thanks. Well, here we are. Neil and I are now heading for the venue. It's a lovely evening, beautiful warm weather, and the view here is fantastic. I mean, I've just found this area, this part of the country which I've hardly visited for a long, long time. In fact, I've never been in this area for a long, long time. Has a wonderful, amazing vibe to it. Has a very, very powerful energy, which I can't quite decipher, but it's really quite something. So we'll hopefully be there soon, and then I'll get to work with my talk.
I'm not going to hang around too long. We're looking a bit faint at the moment. So we've got
Neil
in January doing all the stuff over there. Do you remember him in January? Yeah. Yeah? How do you forget him? And we've got Ben, who's a friend of Neil. And all I'm going to say about that on there tells you everything, doesn't it? Roswell Rising. So, all I can say is Mr. Ben
Emlyn-Jones.
Jones,
yes.
Jones. Roswell Rising, everybody.
Thanks for having me. You're very privileged. I was going to apply for the job of Prime Minister, but I decided to come here instead, seeing as it's vacant, as I found out. I'm too honest, that's it, I'm too honest. We're talking aliens tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Aliens. I actually met the aliens guy with the hair, aliens. He was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in Blackpool, and I did actually get to meet Georgios Soukalos, yeah. Nice chap. He's a nice chap, yeah, he really is. Are any of you aware of what happened 75 years ago today? Anybody? Well, more or less. New Mexico, USA, yeah. It's actually officially it's tomorrow, because that's when the famous newspaper headline came out, which is this one. 75 years ago, this is from the 8th of July 1947, the Roswell Daily Record. Now, your eyes do not deceive you. RAAF captures flying saucer on a ranch in the Roswell region. This is one of the most famous newspaper headlines in the world. Have any of you seen this before? Yeah. Yeah, it's very well known. It's an extraordinary document, this. And I think it's something that I don't think anyone is ever going to forget. But to just give a bit of explanation for people who are not aware of it, Roswell is a town. It's a town in New Mexico, USA, and it's quite a small place, really. They call it a city, but Americans tend to say that about everything, even something with a few hundred people. It's in a remote part of New Mexico, in a desert country, very hot in the summer, very cold in the winter, and there's lots of, ranches around there, a lot of livestock farms and things like that. That's their primary industry. And RAAF stands for Roswell Army Air Force. This was before there was the US Air Force. So RAAF is the base. There was a big military base there run by the Army Air Force. this is literally just a very, very short time after this that the US Air Force was formed, as was the Central Intelligence Agency, which I think is very, very, I think that's very apt. But yeah, believe it or not, they announced they captured a flying saucer. This was just a very short time, actually, just 10 days after a chap called Kenneth Arnold was flying in a light aircraft near Mount Rainier in Washington State, USA. And he saw a group of objects in the sky, which he described as being like saucers. And the term flying saucer was born. And so this is kind of just a kind of it started a kind of national craze. It started a national I hesitate to use the word flap. I'm just checking the camera can see me all right. Yeah, I think it can, yeah.
Can I just interrupt a moment? Because I've got to say, it's a Al's presentation, but it's going to be Q&A afterwards.
Slightly.
If there are any questions, you hold on until the end. You'd like to let it flow.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers, thanks, Lorna. Cheers. Yeah, so everyone was talking flying saucers at that time. There was even a song called "When You See Those Flying Saucers." It was a quite popular song by the Buchanan Brothers, and so they captured one, which means basically this. What happened was, according to this article, one of these objects, one of these flying saucers, came to grief on the Earth's surface. It crashed like an aeroplane would crash. It doesn't matter how high technology, it doesn't matter how high their technology is, whoever built this thing, or whatever built it, engineering is never 100% hassle-free. Things do go wrong. Some people have suggested that sometimes radar transmissions from the Earth can cause problems with the flying saucer's engine. Some people say lightning. One thing that happens, and I'll have to say, and I'll tell you more about this later, when a craft like this, of non-human construction, an artifact of non-human construction, that's what I believe it was. When they do crash, when they go wrong, it's often associated with thunderstorms. Lightning, thunder, these things these tend to affect these things adversely. And there's many of the occasions where these things do come down are associated with very, very strong thunderstorms. On the 2nd of July 1947, there was a massive storm and possibly contributed to this. Now, let's have a look at where we're talking about. This is, now if you want to know where Roswell is, it's actually difficult to find on a map. This is New Mexico, one of the 50 states of the American Union, and the actual Roswell is on the southwest of this area called it's Chavez County. Do you see this? There's this box on the right here is called Chavez County, and you see Roswell in the middle of it. Now, just to the north of that, to the north and west, is Lincoln County. And there's a place called Corona, and just where that red arrow is pointing, which is just about 20 miles southeast of Corona, is where that actually happened. Corona is a tiny little village in the middle of nowhere. And what happened was there was this huge media furore surrounding that newspaper headline that I've just described. And reporters were turning up from all over the world. They were phoning in. Anyone who could get to Roswell got to Roswell. This little backwater became a massive focus of international news for just 24 hours. Then the following day, the Roswell Daily Record, the 9th of July 1947, published a follow-up article, General Ramey empties Roswell saucer. Very witty, isn't it? That person should work for the Sun, honestly. In my novel, Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure, this is a fictionalized account of what happened in this event. The main character is actually the person who wrote these two articles. Now, I don't know the real person, the real author of these articles. It was some journalist for the Roswell Daily Record. I'm not sure. We could probably find out, but it doesn't really matter. So what happened was, you see, General Ramey empties Roswell saucer. In other words, there was no flying saucer. It was a weather balloon. That's how the story goes. Now, what happened was, this is Major Jesse Marcel. He's head of intelligence for the 509th Very Heavy Bombardment Group of the Army Air Force. They're famous or infamous in history because they dropped the first atomic bombs in the end of World War II on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And they were based at Roswell. He was the intelligence officer for this particular unit. And he was the one charged with dealing with this issue, the police. What happened was a guy called Mac Brazel, who's a rancher, a farmer from the location where that red arrow was, turned up at the police station with a whole load of material, strange material, very light pieces of metallic strip and beams, and things which, even though they resembled aluminium foil, could not be burnt, they couldn't be bent, they couldn't be ripped. And even using powerful drills, you couldn't make a hole in them. Very, very strong indeed. And when you folded it up, it it seemed to have some kind of memory. It could unfurl itself and become flat again. Now, the police called him basically and told him to go and deal with it because they thought it was a US Air Force matter. He went and he gathered the debris. Very, very, very important this. He took some of it home and he showed it to his wife and son, his young son, who was called Jesse Marcel Jr. And that's very important because that man, Jesse Marcel Jr., his son, has become a crucial witness in this entire case. And then he was summoned to Fort Worth, Texas, which is the headquarters of the 8th Army Air Force, of which the Roswell garrison is a unit, one of the units. And he was taken to the office of General Roger Ramey, who's basically his immediate superior, or his senior superior. And they just said, crouch down and hold these pieces of material, would you? He said, okay. He's a military man, he obeys orders. You don't question these things in his position. He was a major, this guy was a general. He just, yes sir, and he did it. And then a load of news reporters were brought in and they took photographs of him holding this material. There's another one. Now that's General Ramey and Colonel Dubose, his assistant, holding the same material. And this was presented to the world as the material gathered near the ranch at Corona. And they were told, therefore, that the story, General Ramey empties Roswell saucer, the gist of it was, and this was repeated in the world's media across the entire planet from all kinds of different areas, on the radio as well, was that what Mac Brazel had discovered on his ranch, and indeed Jesse Marcel, Major Marcel, top intelligence officer of at the time the only nuclear armed combat unit in the world, had discovered was a weather balloon. A weather balloon these are used by the Roswell Army Air Force Base all the time. They send them up. They're simple things. They just have this tinfoil is a radar target basically, so they can be tracked from the ground, and they're used to measure wind speed and direction, which is very important for aerial operations. The problem is that Jesse Marcel Sr., Major Jesse Marcel, knew very well what a weather balloon was. They're very, very common. They come down all the time. When the gas escapes, they just drop to the ground. Even dogs and sheep and cows recognize them. They're very, very common. They fall from the sky, just like hailstones. So what is a top intelligence officer doing making a mistake like that? Doesn't make sense. And indeed, this news story really doesn't make sense. And anyone with an ounce of critical thinking would realize this is some kind of cover-up. Jesse Marcel was basically made into a kind of scapegoat. He was said, well, he made this blunder. The newspaper reported him making a terrible mistake. He mistook a common weather balloon instead of what he thought was wreckage from a ship from the stars. And of course, that's completely untrue. Now, interestingly enough, you can see that General Ramey is holding it looks like a letter in his hand there. Do you see that? He's holding a piece of paper. I won't go into details about this, but in another shot you see the letter more clearly, and someone's actually, obviously at the time he was holding it in his hands, and because he didn't guess that 70 years in the future people would have the technology to blow that image up and examine it and maybe read some of the words in that letter, but a guy called Bill Wood has done that. It's very interesting. Now, what happened to Jesse? Jesse went away. He did his duty. He realized that he was going to be the fall guy, so he just, unfortunately a man in his position couldn't do anything else until he left the Air Force and retired. But he brooded about it. He was upset. He knew, his son knew, his wife knew, and many, many years later, in fact 31 years later, he couldn't hold it in any longer. He broke his security oaths, and he decided to tell someone who was into UFOs, who would listen to him and take him seriously. And he couldn't have made a better choice. He went to Stanton T. Friedman, who's one of the most, probably, like I said, he's the best guy to go to for things like this. Friedman listened to him, listened to his story about what had happened, and said, Marcel, he even got he filmed it. This was 1978 at a UFO conference when Jesse met Stan. Stan quickly got together a film crew and they recorded an interview with this guy because he was very old and he was ill. He knew he wasn't going to live much longer. In fact, he died a couple of years later. And the interviews you can find on YouTube now that he did, and he describes the material that he held in his hands. He describes showing it to his wife and son. His son and his granddaughter have confirmed this. And he also said that when he went to General Ramey's office, the material he was holding was not the material that he found. It had been switched. The General Ramey empties Roswell saucer was a cover-up. And that's not even disputed now. Everyone, even the officialdom has now admitted it. In fact, they did. And I'll explain more about their fake confession in a little while. But what happened was this material, this information went viral, to use a modern expression. And this book came out in 1980, The Roswell Incident by Charles Berlitz and William Moore. I've got a copy of the first edition of this. It's worth reading, although if you're familiar with this case, you'll know it's kind of like this started the ball rolling, and since then there's been a dozen more books. There's been a huge amount of movies, TV shows. It's inspired fiction, not least my own, and many other. The Dark Skies, Project Blue Book, The X-Files. How many of you have seen these things? Who's seen The X-Files? Now, easier question, who hasn't seen The X-Files? Exactly. One person! Oh my goodness me, that's more than I expected. And of course, Roswell itself has not failed to capitalise on this, because when this story came out in that book, with that book and all the subsequent books that followed it, they decided, well, people want to come and visit, and suddenly people started turning up to see this place, this amazing place where this is made to happen, people who are into UFOs. And, of course, they decided to cater for those tourists. And indeed, hey, you see here, it says, welcome to Roswell, and you see like the flying saucer there. Carry on along here, you see this is this UFO parking only, I like it. Do you see it crashing in through the ceiling there, the alien? This is a typical tourist shop in Roswell. And that, did I skip one? No, that is a street light. That's a street light in Roswell. It's got alien eyes on it. And I've never been to Roswell, never. It's a place I've got to go to. I should have visited it before I wrote the book, because I've written books set there, but I didn't get the chance. And this is the crest of the town. It's got Roswell. And look, do you see the alien up there? Yeah. You couldn't make it up, look. Hey, how you doing? You couldn't make it up, look. The Roswell official town crest now has a little alien on it. So they really, this has become a massive part of local culture, and Roswell is now a mecca for tourists who are into this sort of thing. People like me, basically, who want to go there. Now, the skeptics, people who disbelieve, you probably are familiar with skeptics, you guys, aren't you? People who just disbelieve and all this sort of thing. The skeptics haven't missed the opportunity to point out the way that Roswell has become this hotspot for ufological tourism. One of the few in the world. It's not the only one. There are a couple of others. It hasn't hesitated to point that out. And there's, in fact, skeptic books. I do read skeptic books. I'm interested in hearing both sides of the story. And one of them describes the tourist scene in Roswell. It is about 7 pages of just endless descriptions in the most disparaging terms possible. You can see the author is extremely angry and thinks it's extremely cringy that this town has decided to pander to what they consider the dysfunctions and delusions of people. And because they don't believe Roswell is real, they think it was just a weather balloon. Or they think it was something else. They don't think it was alien. So basically, Roswell's lying. Well, first of all, I don't believe that's true. And secondly, did the Communist Party take power in the night? Since when has it been a crime for a town to exploit its history? This is Stratford-on-Avon. It is in England. It's in Warwickshire. That there is Anne Hathaway's house, who's That there's William Shakespeare, and Anne, he wasn't married to her, but he was kind of like, well, he did marry her, I think at one point. There was a difficult relationship. But basically, if you go to Stratford-on-Avon, right, it's a tourist hotspot. There's theatres, there's souvenir shops, there's themed car parks, themed restaurants, pubs, exactly like what you get in Roswell. The difference is, the one difference is that it's about William Shakespeare, this famous writer. It's not about Roswell. It's not about aliens, it's not about aliens, it's about William Shakespeare. That's the only difference. So, again, no one complains about this. No one complains about Stratford-on-Avon exploiting its own history for its own prosperity. No one ever writes them and said, what do you think you're doing? How much money are you making off this Shakespeare thing? Don't you think that's a bit immoral? Don't you think that's a bit tacky? Get rid of it. Shut down all the theatres. Get rid of those souvenir shops. Throw out those leather-bound Romeo and Juliet scripts. Bin those glow-in-the-dark Hamlet skulls. You're not allowed to do this. If Stratford-on-Avon is not a normal town without any history, this time tomorrow I'm going to be very cross indeed. But you see, because I happen to think it was an extraterrestrial crash at Roswell, so I don't see what the problem is. I don't see why it's such a big deal, why these skeptics get on such a hobby horse about it. Now, Stanton Friedman, after the research he did, and other people who helped him out, William Moore, Charles Berlitz, who wrote the book. Charles Berlitz actually wrote a very famous, he wrote phrase books, language phrase books and things like that. He wrote that book. There's been many, many others. They said, well, the government's lying. They're lying about their weather balloon story. And the government said, no, we're not. It's true. It was a weather balloon. And the skeptics all said, yeah, you see, the government are telling you now it's a weather balloon. And they never lie, do they? It's a weather balloon. And then in 1997, they published this, the Roswell Report, case closed. Headquarters, United States Air Force. This was a big, thick book, actually. And do you know what it says in it? Hey guys, you know we've been telling you it was a weather balloon and you said it wasn't, and we said it was and we weren't lying. Well, we were lying. It wasn't a weather balloon. So after how many years? 50 years of saying that it was a weather balloon and they were telling the truth. They then turned this on its head and said, no, we were lying, it's not a weather balloon. So we're going to write this, and this time we're telling you the truth. Honest. This is the Roswell Report, case closed. But guess what? What's in it? Nothing. They say it wasn't aliens, it was something else. This is a huge balloon. You see, that's an aircraft carrier there. And this is actually the largest unmanned balloon ever flown. I think it's like 1,500 feet tall, something like that. It's a really, really huge balloon. It doesn't carry a crew, but it does carry a huge amount of very, very sensitive material. It was built in the post-World War II era because to fly to a very, very high altitude where it could pick up very low-frequency sound waves coming from the Soviet Union. The kind of low-frequency sound that can only be produced by a detonating atomic bomb. Because despite the fact that they were boasting about, America was boasting about, as I said, being the only country in the world with the atomic bomb, the 509th was the only nuclear-armed unit in the world. They knew that the Soviets were catching up. They were planning their own bomb, and it was only a matter of time, probably just a couple of years before they had their own. Indeed, they did succeed in 1949 in detonating their first bomb. And that was designed to look for it. It's called Project Mogul. Lots of these balloons were launched over a long period of time. And according to that Roswell report, one of them came down and crashed in the New Mexico desert in early July 1947. And is that not aliens? It wasn't a weather balloon. They lied about that. But this is the truth, right? This is the truth. It was the Project Mogul balloon. It was Project Mogul. Even though Project Mogul had never been heard of before this Roswell report came out, it was never declassified until that moment. And this is what all the fuss was about. They said that basically, one thing they didn't really tackle properly was explaining the materials that Major Jesse Marcel found, but, well, they don't go into that. It's best to forget about that. It didn't tackle that in an adequate way. Now, several people, a guy called Glenn Dennis. Glenn Dennis was a local undertaker, and he had a girlfriend who was a nurse on the Roswell Army Air Base. And there were several other people said this, that when the wreckage from the extraterrestrial spacecraft was recovered near Corona, it included live alien beings, biological entities, as in Close Encounters of the Third Kind type aliens. These were taken to the airbase and they were examined. Then everything, including the alien bodies, the dead bodies, and there was rumoured to be living aliens as well. And the wreckage, this wreckage that Major Marcel couldn't identify, they were taken to Wright Field, which is now Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the head of the technical data section. Now, the thing about it is, along with the material, what was actually found was Project Mogul, and guess what? The alien bodies that were seen by these people, that could be explained too. It was these parachute test dummies. That's what it was. That's what landed in the desert. Everyone, the witnesses, including highly trained Air Force medics, thought were extraterrestrial beings. They described them in great detail. Large almond-shaped eyes, fingers with suckers on the end instead of nails. One woman actually witnessed what she described as a post-mortem examination, an autopsy on one of these aliens. She was the one who described it to, was the girlfriend actually of Glenn Dennis, the undertaker. Now, a lot of people claim that this woman never existed. Glenn Dennis made her up. But Stanton Friedman has found her. He knows someone else who knows her. She has been identified. She told someone else as well. Now, first problem is that is not an alien, is it? It looks like a human. It's designed to look like a human. It's designed to be exactly the same size, shape, and weight as a human being. The reason is because it's intended to test parachutes. Rather than putting a real person on there, they put the dummy on there to simulate a person to find out if the parachute works. And how could people think something is an alien that is designed specifically to look like a human being? Another problem. It was 6 years in the future. The testing of these dummies in the Roswell area didn't even begin until 1952. Not 1947. But we're going to overlook that because we want to believe there are no aliens, right, guys? The truth of the matter is, an extraterrestrial spacecraft did crash in Roswell, New Mexico, 75 years ago today. And what's more, it's not the only one. There's many. This happens a lot. And the funny thing is, whenever it happens, there's many examples I could give you, including one, I believe, several have happened in this country. The same thing always happens. The military move in, they seal off the area, they remove the decisive physical evidence, and then they come out with some cock and bull cover story. That there is Annesley Hall. Now that was the home of the Sheriff of Nottingham, the real one. And that's near Nottingham. It's just by the M1. I've been there, I've looked it up, I've filmed there, I've investigated with some local researchers, because in 1987, in October 1987, what happened at Roswell happened there. An extraterrestrial, non-human created artifact came to grief on the surface, just in the field outside that building. I'm convinced of that. The evidence is overwhelming. And there's others. Now, this is really interesting. How far back does this go? That's the question. Because we hear about Roswell's happening after Roswell. Roswell happened, and then there were other examples after that. The word Roswell, which is the name of the town, has actually, in ufological language, has come to refer to any kind of incident like this. Any type of incident in which something crashes, something extraterrestrial, non-human, comes to grief on the Earth's surface, is secretly salvaged by the government, who then put out a cover story. And one thing that strikes me about the Roswell incident is there were blunders, there were mistakes being made. The fact that the news story about the flying disc was put out was a massive mistake. It could be traced back to someone called Colonel Blanchard and Lieutenant William Hout, the press officer. But what strikes me is the military response indicates that the Army Air Force seemed to know what it was doing. They seemed to know what they were doing. Apart from the blunder with a newspaper article, they knew what they were doing. In fact, there was planes landing. Some of the soldiers were seen on the base that were not resident there. No one knew who they were. There was there were black soldiers and white soldiers together serving in the same detachment, which wouldn't have happened normally because the army was segregated in 1947. So black men had to serve in their own separate units. Yet they were serving together. They were working together at the Roswell Army Air Force Base, visitors to that area. Which means they were part of a detachment. They were part of an existing detachment. One that the government had already organized in advance. They seemed to know what they were doing. They seemed to have already been trained and had experience with this highly unusual duty. Because there's no way the government could have responded in the expert way they did, unless that was the case. So which means there were Roswells before Roswell. As I said, it's not just the name of the town in ufological parlance. It is a common noun, which you hear attached to things. You have like the Welsh Roswell, the Russian Roswell, the Brazilian Roswell, etc., etc. This is the Texas Roswell, and guess what? It was 50 years before Roswell. This was I'll read this out here. This is the Aurora Cemetery. Aurora is a little town in Texas, USA. And it's got a famous cemetery there. There's lots of like Civil War graves and things like that. It's very, very well organised, very well kept by the local people. Well, this little paragraph here is very interesting. This site is also well known because of the legend that a spaceship crashed in 1897, and the pilot was killed and the crash and was buried here. In that cemetery, there was a grave where it's alleged an alien is buried. In 1897, there's a house it's by a guy called Judge Proctor. What they described as an airship, that's the only terminology they could use that in those days, crashed into a wind turbine, and the wreckage went everywhere. All the Aurora Town's residents came out and wanted to see what was going on, and they found a dead body of what they describe as a man from Mars. Again, that's how people talked about it in those days. He was given a full Christian burial in the cemetery, and his grave is in the cemetery. There's an alien, or there used to be an alien buried in that cemetery. The problem was, like in 1975, unfortunately there's always a long gap between something happening and research beginning. Local journalist Jim Mars investigated this, and they said, oh yeah, we got this alien buried in our cemetery. They showed him the grave. There's an alien buried under there. Buried there in 1897. Jim Mars started writing about this in the local newspapers. Next thing you know, someone's moved in and they started fiddling with the grave. They nicked the gravestone, and it's pretty clear that it's been dug up. The alien body in its coffin is no longer there. In 1975, it was removed. Why? Cover up. This is, believe it or not, this is a proven handwritten note. Now, this is all in Italian, which a language I can't speak. It was a report written in 1931 for Benito Mussolini, the leader of Italy at the time. Il Duce, they called him, the leader of Italy. There's a book called The Fascist UFO Files, a dramatic title. It's by Roberto Pinozzi, which talks about the era of the 1920s and 1930s in Italy, in which there was a distinct climate of belief and open-mindedness towards the idea of UFOs. Even though you couldn't walk down the street without having your papers checked, at least you knew the government were interested in UFOs. It's the other way around today, of course. That there is a picture of the craft they captured. And you see two disc-shaped objects here, and there's like a cigar-shaped object with windows and what looks like some structure at the back. What happened was there was a Roswell-type crash retrieval at a place called Pontevecchio, it's in Lombardy. It's near Magenta in Lombardy. In 1931, an object came to grief on the Earth's surface, was secretly salvaged by the government, and they never said a word about it. Except that Mussolini established, even it was actually a couple of years earlier, he established, I forgot the name, I forgot what it's called, but it was a special unit designed to search for UFOs and to investigate UFOs. I don't know if it's the first of its kind in the world, but it's highly unusual. It was long before Project Sign, which was the US's first attempt. So why is this being kept? Why is this being kept secret? Why can't they just say, we're not alone in this universe, There are craft out there being flown by beings from another world. They're not millions of light years away where we can see them with a telescope. I've got an entire talk about that. They're with us here on the Earth. They're interacting with us all the time. Anyone have any? Well, we'll have a question and answer at the end, and I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. But I'll give you my own ideas about why I think that is. There's actually many reasons why. Firstly, do you remember this article? UFO hits wind turbine. This is interesting. Yeah, a strange object was seen, struck that particular wind turbine. It was quite a windy night, and these wind turbines are not very reliable in high winds. However, several witnesses saw an object strike it. Now, this isn't taken very seriously in the media, and there's a reason for that, which I'll come on to. But I think the governments of this world don't really regard us as intelligent adults. I think the people who run governments, the state officials, have quite a low opinion of people, the general population. In fact, we've seen this in recent years, haven't we? We've seen this in recent years. We have a Prime Minister who's just gone because he was forcing people to obey by lockdown rules, and he was breaking them himself. Probably because he just thinks, well, why not? They're just ordinary people and we're superior. So they basically treat us like little kids. Now, you keep information from children because you don't want to scare them. So they keep this from us because they don't want to admit that there are things in the airspace that are regularly invading our airspace. Indeed, they do send up, the RAF sends up interceptors, the US Air Force does, and the air forces of all countries do send up interceptors to investigate these things when they happen, but they don't tell us about it because they don't want to admit the truth, which is not only do these things exist, there's nothing we can do to stop them. Politicians don't like to admit when they can't do something. They come up with all kinds of convoluted flannel. They get spin doctors in to write speeches for them, but they don't admit. They would never stand up on stage and said. They would never want to stand up on a stage and say something is happening. We're powerless to do anything about it. Sorry, you're just going to have to put up with it because we can't protect you. This is an image. This was actually a book cover by a guy called Whitley Strieber. He was a successful novelist, American guy, who wrote a book called Communion because he experienced an alien abduction. A fairly typical one. Alien abductions are more common than you think. I'm not going to ask any of you if you are alien abductees. Do you know anyone who you believe has been taken by aliens? Anyone? It's more common than you might think. It's possible there's people who have had these experiences and they don't want to tell you. So these aliens don't only destroy wind turbines, they do worse than that. They take people. They take people sometimes from their beds and sometimes from their waking life, or sometimes when they're sleeping. And well, the most common thing they do is they do what looks like some kind of medical experiments on us, or medical examinations, as if they're curious, as we would a mysterious animal we caught in the woods. Now, they do this with impunity. They can go wherever they want, take whomever they like, wherever they like, and for however long. They do when they put you back at the end of it, and most people can't remember straight away, but it often comes back to them. And there's nothing the government can do to prevent this from happening. There's several ufologists have weird ideas. They have some ideas which I don't think are true, such as, the aliens, they have a treaty. Have you ever heard that? Aliens have done a treaty with Eisenhower in the 50s. You know, they give us certain technologies if we allow them to do experiments on human beings, on our people. The thing is, though, in any such negotiations, humans wouldn't have very much to bring to the table. The aliens can basically do that. They can do what they like. They can do that anyway, whatever they like. They don't need our permission. So is whoever's replacing Boris going to stand up on a podium outside Downing Street and saying, "You people, I believe that several million of you have been taken by aliens. They've taken you away, they've done things to you, usually medical experimentation. Some people have come to great harm as a result of this. There's been deaths associated with this. There's absolutely nothing we can do to prevent this. You're just going to have to put up with it. We can't protect you. Again, what kind of spin doctor could write a speech that would make them look anything other than incompetent and helpless? Government politicians, they don't like to appear that way. This is Linda Moulton Howe. Anyone familiar with her? Yeah, she's a very, very well-known ufologist, and today she's like a full-time ufologist. This is her as a young woman in 1980, and she's done a video called Strange Harvest. It's not easy to come by. There's only one copy I found of it online. But what she actually discovered, which got her into ufology, she was a non-ufological journalist before then, was that animals, it's cattle at first that she reports, but it turns out there are other species as well, are turning up dead with strange injuries, parts of their body missing. It appears that they've been surgically removed. Parts of their body have been removed. They haven't been attacked by predators, they haven't just died of natural causes, they haven't had accidents, they've literally just been disappeared one day and they've come back and they have parts of their body missing, removed surgically. And this is what she was investigating. And when these events happen, they're very often associated with the appearance of UFOs. What kind of compensation package would farmers demand if the government just spoke openly about this? How would DEFRA, how would the minister in charge of this, how would they deal with it? How could they cope with these angry farmers? How could they say, this is happening, we can't stop it? This is a rural area. You probably all know people who are farmers. You may be farmers yourselves or have something to do with agriculture. This is going on everywhere. It happens all over the world. You may well have heard of instances like this. And what will you do when they say, well, the government can't protect you from this? They're helpless. They don't like to appear helpless. But there's another reason why I think this is kept secret. And I think actually this is even more important, even more fundamental to the reason why the governments don't want us to know what's going on. Energy. Energy, yes. Now that is a typical flying saucer depiction. We don't know exactly where they come from, but they seem to be able to travel at enormous speeds. They're highly maneuverable. They sometimes come down from space. They sometimes come out from the sea. They just sometimes appear. They're coming from somewhere that's not on the Earth. Now, if they are traveling vast distances across the universe or coming through interdimensional portals, they're not doing it on Texaco unleaded 4-star. They're using some very esoteric energy system, propulsion system that we're not aware of. Possibly the kind of energy that can maybe last forever. The kind of energy that can last forever, that is clean, that is safe, and doesn't require fossil fuels. You see, the thing about it is it's a big subject, and it's got a lot to do with our relationship with those in power, and our relationship with the extraterrestrials, and indeed their relationship. It's a kind of triumvirate, an infernal triangle of control, deception, manipulation. It's the energy. One of the key elements of society, economically and socially, is the distribution and control of energy. Energy comes from various sources on this, usually from power stations which are coal-fired or gas-fired more likely today. It's natural gas or coal. Vehicles are run by oil. Some of them are electric, but the electricity is generated from those power stations. There are some alternatives such as nuclear fission. There's renewables like the wind turbine. Even when they're not being struck by UFOs, they're not terribly reliable, those things. They need a lot of maintenance. In other words, the ability to dish out energy in a restrictive way gives the state and corporate ruling classes enormous control over the population. If you take that grip of control away, the general grip of power that the state and corporate sector has on the population will diminish enormously. Which is why the fact that energy can be created out of nothing. Energy can be created out of thin air. I believe the extraterrestrials are doing it, and that's what powers their craft. That's what propels their craft. Anti-gravity, propulsion, and free energy. It can be made from nothing. It can come out of the very fabric of space itself. Clean, free, limitless, safe energy. It's a big subject. Let's begin. The best place to begin is by discussing this man. Does anyone recognise him? It's Nikola Tesla, yes. I think he's one of the most important people in modern history. He was born in 1856 in Serbia. Rumour has it there was a big thunderstorm when he was born. From the very youngest age, he was fascinated by electricity. In 1884, he emigrated to the United States and set up the power generation business. And indeed, there are over 150 patents to his name, which are completely unclassified, including the alternating current system, which we use today, which powers all the electrical appliances in this room. Created by Tesla. He had a big argument and a big bust-up with a guy called George Westinghouse over whether they use direct current, which you get from batteries, or alternating currents, which you get from the mains. Now, along with that kind of work, though, he did other work as well, because he believed, in fact, he discovered that electricity doesn't need to be generated using the methods I've just described, which in the 19th century, these electricity, towards the end of the late 19th century, the last couple of decades, electricity was emerging as a new phenomenon in terms of energy delivery. And the points that I just made about energy generation were already being accepted by the political classes. Tesla said, no, this is not necessary. You can create energy out of nothing. And, well, he got into an awful lot of trouble for saying that, which I'll describe in a little while. But to begin with, he built this. This is at Wardenclyffe-on-Sea, Long Island, New York. This is an experimental power station that delivered an electric current to the grid. And the energy, where's the generator? It's just this thing sticking up into the sky, which is drawing electricity from the Earth's atmosphere. It charges an electrode there, which then charges cables and provides a workable current. This guy here is Victor Schauberger. Now, he made an important point. What this guy discovered was very, very important. He was similar to Tesla. He was an out-of-the-box thinker. He was actually a forester. He wasn't a scientist. He was an Austrian who worked in the woods, and he used to watch fish in a stream swimming in the water. And he realized that the only way these fish could be swimming, these trout, were if they had somehow evolved some way of getting energy from the water itself. In other words, they were actually moving without flapping their fins. You can actually see this in some rivers. They move along without really moving their fins very much. They're using their gills for propulsion. They create vortices in the water, which seem to extract energy from the water, which contributes to propulsion. And he developed something called the trout turbine, which is an engine which runs on water of a certain temperature, and flowing in a certain way through pipes of a certain shape, doesn't need any fuel. If you put it on a boat, that boat wouldn't need sails, it wouldn't need an engine, it wouldn't need anything like that.
Can you please say the name again?
Victor Schauberger. Schauberger. Very interesting to listen to this guy. This guy, he ended up having to work for the Nazis. I mean, after Hitler annexed Austria, he was forced to work for the Nazis. After the end of World War II, everything went quiet with him. What I believe happened was that his invention was classified. Now, who's going to object to this? This is the important point I've already said, right? Of course, there are political reasons why there's never going to be any kind of well, it's going to be very, very difficult to get an official admission that free energy exists. Very difficult, not impossible at all. But of course, there's an outer party of people who simply want to make money. This is their industry. Oil is their industry. It's in fact, I'd say oil is more than an industry. It's not just the biggest industry on earth. It is industry. In a sense, it is the lubricant and lifeblood of civilization as we know it. A civilization that gives the corporate ruling class, enormous power over the population. Enormous power. But it has terrible consequences for our livelihoods. And we're seeing this now with energy price rises, aren't we? Once again, we have energy shooting up. I've done an entire talk on this called Energy, Politics and UFOs, where I go into that in more detail. But of course, what are you going to say to these people? Supposing you come forward and say, well, Nikola Tesla, Victor Schauberger, this is what they invented. We're going to let everyone use this instead. We're going to have energy. Well, forget the energy price rises. We'll give you energy that costs nothing. We'll give all the people energy that costs nothing. What are these guys going to say? You're going to knock on the door of the chairman of Exxon or Shell or BP and say to them, so I just come to tell you your services are no longer required. And they'll say, okay, that's not a problem. We can adapt. We can reinvent ourselves with a new brand, you know. You still need oil to make candles, don't you? That's a good one. Shell candles. They smell nice. They're pretty colours. They won't stain your wallpaper. Yes, there'll be a big dollar on Shell candles, won't they? No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Did these bankers destroy Tesla to stop his gift of free energy for all? JP Morgan and the other bankers. They pretended to back Tesla, but effectively they were just seeking to control him. When they found out his plans to give the world free energy as a gift, they silenced Tesla using their newspapers they control. Lots of other methods as well. JP Morgan, Warburg there, and John D. Rockefeller. Yeah. Don't you think John D. Rockefeller looks like a kind of evil Kenneth Williams? He does, doesn't he? You know, you see other photographs that even more clearly. That's the richest guy in the world, by the way. He's richer than Elon Musk. If you take into account differences in currency values, this guy's fortune was more than Elon Musk. He's the richest guy who ever lived. But yeah, what happened was they bought a 51% share in Tesla's company. And in 1917, the experimental power station at Wardenclyffe-on-Sea was demolished. And there's nothing Tesla could do about it. He'd handed over his company to them. Tesla was a genius, but he wasn't very streetwise. And he was very easy to take advantage of, sadly. As JP Morgan famously said, if I can't stick a meter on it, I don't want it. They were also very concerned about Tesla's relationship with Henry Ford. Henry Ford, the motoring pioneer. In 1904, Ford created a series of cars which were mass-produced on a production line, the way they are today. This made them much cheaper than cars in the past. Ordinary people could afford them. He was going to do a deal with Tesla to say, basically, we'll make these cars electric and you can use Tesla's energy. Tesla says, I'll provide the energy generation systems, which are free. You make the cars. And for a while, Ford had two production lines at his factory. One petrol engine cars, like the ones we have today, and the other electric cars. And they basically, JP Morgan, Rockefeller, Warburg, the others, they shut down the electric line. And since then, every car's been petrol driven. Obviously, we have hybrids and electric cars today, but they're not Tesla. They're not run off Tesla's energy. The fact that Elon Musk calls his motoring firm Tesla is some kind of satirical joke. The electricity that runs those cars and electric cars today is generated by conventional terms. They have very efficient batteries now, which makes them practical, but they're not free energy. And it goes on. Anyone recognise these guys? This is a tricky one. That's Stanley Pons and Martin Fleischmann. Now, in 1989, they discovered something remarkable. They actually rediscovered something that had first been observed in 1926, which is the anomalous heat effect. They were doing a chemistry experiment, quite a simple one, electrolysis. They were running an electric current with a palladium cathode through deuterium. Deuterium is what's known as heavy water. Heavy water is, it's actually, it's like normal water, but it has an extra electron, I think. Heavy water is very common. There's probably a couple of micrograms in this bottle right now. It exists in normal water. What they found is that it suddenly started giving off a huge amount of energy, heat. It gave off a huge amount of energy. And they suddenly realized, well, they said this must be nuclear fusion. Now, it turns out there was somebody involved in this project that told these guys to call it nuclear fusion, and so the term cold fusion was coined. Anyone remember the cold fusion scandal of 1989, anyone? This was a big thing for about 2 months. We've discovered a way to make energy out of nothing. Basically, all you need is deuterium, and there's so much deuterium in the world, in the oceans, in the rivers. You know, you could run the entire planet on it for 10 million years. And these guys have discovered how to do it almost effortlessly, which means basically the world I've described with energy that is safe, clean, efficient, free, and eternal, and non-polluting, will become a reality. Well, firstly, it wasn't nuclear fusion. This is the thing. Martin Fleischmann said that. They should have just called it the anomalous heat effect, but there was a guy called Stephen E. Jones who persuaded them to do otherwise. Someone called Andrew Johnson, who Neil and I know, he's done a full lecture on what happened with cold fusion. But basically, it was covered up. This is an important point. The bad guys in this world, the inner party, whatever you want to call them, the Illuminati, the deep state, they're not perfect. They're not all powerful. Many people in distant circles attribute almost magical powers to these people. They have almost sort of supernatural ability to do whatever they like, but they don't. They make mistakes. Releasing that newspaper headline about the flying saucer being captured, that was a mistake. Pons and Fleischmann experiment becoming an international news sensation, it was a mistake. What happened to those two guys was damage limitation. The bad guys decided to try and correct their mistake. So they made a public example. They pilloried these two guys as village idiots. And they never worked in science again. But the anomalous heat effect is still there. It was observed from 1926. It's still being experimented on today, but you just don't hear about it. This is Stanley Meyer. Now, if you are one of these people known as tinkerers, like amateur inventors, at some point, if you build something that works, if you're into the free energy business, and there's entire communities now, people, who research free energy. If you're into one of these businesses, sooner or later you'll get a knock on your door from some very nice men in smartly dressed suits who will make you an offer you can't refuse, apparently. I mean, a lot of these guys, I mean, they're just amateurs. They work in their garden shed, annoying their wives and things like that. America has a great tradition in that kind of thing. For example, in the United States, Stanley Meyer was American. The Wright brothers, for example, who built the first working aeroplane, they were these amateur inventors, non-qualified, just working class guys with an idea. Stanley Meyer was another of these people. He built a car which runs on water. Now, the reason how it actually works is complicated, but basically it used the anomalous heat effect or something similar. He was approached by these guys. What they do is they offer you they say, you'll be working like flat out. You're probably in poverty, probably, like you say, your family are annoyed with you. And then they'll offer you like millions and millions of pounds in exchange for a development contract, which will include a non-disclosure agreement. And then that means they then take your invention, you sign up, they give you the money, and they go away and they say, thank you very much, we'll be in touch. And they go away and you never hear from it again. And your invention is shelved and there's nothing you can do about it because you signed the NDA. Now, Meyer didn't fall for that. He didn't sign the NDA. He said, no thanks, I don't want your development contract. So they took him out for a meal to discuss it. In a friendly, gentlemanly way. Then he runs out of the room clutching his throat saying, they've killed me. And he falls down dead. Poisoning. Someone put poison in his food. Being a free energy inventor is actually not a very, very safe occupation. Bruce De Palma, he was shot, apparently in a mugging, although nothing was taken from his wallet. His wallet wasn't taken from his pocket. Eugene Malov fell off a train while drunk, even though he was teetotal. And of course, moving trains, you know, the doors are locked on moving trains. John Searle, basically he was locked in jail and then transferred to a psychiatric hospital, even though there was nothing wrong with him. The list goes on. Maybe there's more to it than that, though. I mean, for example, if we had free energy, it would, for example, it would do, from our point of view, it would create enormous benefits. Enormous benefits. But from the point of view of the ruling class, the elite, whose prime goal is power and control over us, what would that do? Now, one of the ways they keep control of us is, there's a guy called Andy Thomas. Has Andy Thomas ever spoken here? Yeah. Good. I like Andy, he's great. One of the things he says is, everything in society is designed to break your spirit. Our challenge is not to let it. But it's hard, isn't it? Isn't this most people's lives nowadays? Isn't it? Sick, tired, payments, bills, stress, work, job. And it goes on, anxiety, late nights, no sleep, stress, fear. And it's like we have these full spectrum bombardment of problems and fears and it's rising energy prices. Oh, it's a disease that could kill you, you know. And you've got to stay, you've got to lock down, you've got to self-isolate. There's all these other things. And it's not just about money, it's not just about energy, it's about making us feel insecure. When we're insecure, we get frightened. Fear. When we feel fear, what do? We look for someone to protect us from that fear. If we're supposed to be children, then who's the Freudian father figure in Westminster and the White House? Exactly. That's why, and free energy would solve not all, but it would solve most of these problems. Who is the inner party? Now, I'm just going to touch on this because this is a big subject. Who are these people that I call the bad guys, the deep state, the Illuminati? There's different words for them. That we don't know they're these people, if indeed they are people. David Icke thinks they're lizards, and maybe he's correct. I say that in all seriousness. Whoever they are, it doesn't really matter who they are. It's what they're doing that counts. But this is believed to be their symbol. There's the panopticon there. This is on the reverse of the dollar bill. The United States was created by the secret society network. Annuit coeptis, he favours our undertaking, Novus Ordo Seclorum, new order of the world. And you notice there's the capstone there with the eye, the all-seeing eye. Supposedly the eye of God. I mean, you see the panopticon in some churches, but there's like a reverse meaning for these things within the secret society occult network. It's too big a subject to go into in detail, but like I said, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter who they are. It's what they're doing that counts. Another reason that they're keeping quiet about free energy in this is because it has been turned into a weapon. In fact, it's been turned into a weapon far more terrible, really, than the H-bomb. And in the wrong hands, it could be used to devastating effect. And in fact, this lady, Dr. Judy Wood, believes it already has been used to a devastating effect, and it was used on September the 11th, 2001 in New York City. She believes that this weapon, created out of this thing that Tesla discovered, the ability to extract energy out of nothing. It could do us so much good, couldn't it? But like so much else, plowshares can be beaten into swords. And whenever any kind of invention comes along, the first thing the government do is they try to find ways they can turn it into a weapon. They do it with everything else, and they're doing it with this. This is a part of the World Trade Center that was destroyed on that day. A terrible day in New York, where almost 3,000 people were murdered. You see here this big steel column, which is part of the World Trade Center. What is it? It just turns into dust. It just turns, you see? It's one moment it's solid. That's actually 700 feet high. It weighs thousands of tons. It should have just fallen over and maybe taken out an entire city block. But it just turns into dust. What can do that? What kind of energy can do that? That's a very important point. This invention, it could do so much good, but it could do so much evil if it's allowed to. If it's held in the hands of people who are malevolent, who want to destroy. This is interesting. Now, this is a weird video I came across. It's got like a fake soundtrack and a few fake scenes put into it. They're trying to make out this is like some kind of aircraft, which the video is trying to make out is powered by a directional turbojet engine pointing downwards to provide lift. It literally blows this craft up into the sky. The problem is that it doesn't produce any blast. Now, if you look at a jet engine, when you see a jet engine, it produces a huge wind out of its exhaust. You see people in St. Martin's Island, you know, the tourists, they mess around because the airport's right by the beach. They stand in the jet blast for a dare. You don't know if you've seen that. This machine here it's actually in Russia. This is a military unit or some kind of military research unit in Russia testing this device. You see it lifting off the back of a lorry, and there's other guys holding it, guiding it into the air. There's no blast that's whipping around their trouser legs or anything. It flies over these trees here, it flies over a meadow. There's no sign that the grass or the trees are disturbed. I don't think there's a turbojet in this. What I suspect is this is based on the work of a famous Russian inventor in the 1990s called Viktor Davidovich Grebennikov. He discovered that using his study of insects, that you could actually create something that will cancel out gravity. If If you have that, you don't need aircraft you don't need balloons or planes. You can just fly. You can have the ability to fly everywhere. And of course, that automatically involves free energy because you can use then gravity as a propulsion system. Even it's just having a piston that goes up and then down again, driving a dynamo. It could be something as simple as that. Victor Schauberger demonstrated you don't need big industrial methods to extract free energy from the vacuum. Surprisingly simple systems can generate free energy. And even nature has used it, as the trout do in those rivers in Austria. Have you ever gone into a house? Usually it's an old house with bad piping. You turn on the tap and suddenly you hear a growling sound coming from the plumbing. You ever heard that? That's called the water hammer effect. Now, in some circumstances, that generates free energy in the same way that Schauberger discovered. It's simple as that. But free energy is going on. Free energy is being invented, is being worked on privately. You don't hear about it in the media, but they can't stop people. The bad guys, there's the eye in the capstone. They're not all powerful. They have limited power. And there's a guy called Dr. Tiwari in India who's built an experimental power station. There's a guy called Stuart, what's his name? Stuart, I can't remember his surname, I'm sorry. But he's in, that flag on the left is Shetland. So India and Shetland, two very, very different parts of the world. If you heard of him, you know Orkney. Do you know Shetland? Stuart, what's his name? Captain Calamity, what's his name? I interviewed him. Sorry, I've forgotten his name now. I interviewed the guy. He's also working on a free energy device in Shetland, up in the north of the British Isles. They can't cover it up. They can not report it in the media. But how much longer can they keep this genie in the bottle? They managed to get it back in the bottle with Pons and Fleischmann. They can't keep doing that forever. Now, this is your typical UFO story, isn't it? You see, alien backs Clinton. This is how UFOs were reported. You think I'd forgotten about UFOs? I haven't. I'm coming back to them. Now, it's also the 75th anniversary of the Cutler Twining memo. This is a very important document, which was sent to Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillencutter, who was the first head of the CIA. And it said that UFOs, although we know these UFOs are real, we know that they're not man-made, we know that they're invading our airspace and they're intelligently controlled by something that's not human, we can't let the common people know that. So therefore, we will make people think that these things don't exist through official ridicule and denial. That's not exactly a quote, but it's paraphrasing basically what this memo said. Which is why you get newspaper headlines like that, and there's many, many others. You know the newspaper stories when the X-Files music plays in the background. You know those ones, a little toy saucer, and they have in the studio the newsreaders sort of sitting there, and then someone dangles a toy flying saucer around their head, and everyone has a good laugh. And thank you very much. Here's Johnny with the weather. Right, that all changed, didn't it? It all changed in December 2017. I said, well. It's very exact because it is literally actually 70 years and 5 months after the Cutler Twining memo in December 2017. The whole way UFOs are portrayed by the media changed. It changed, it transformed. Why? Why did they abandon a policy which had been enforced without any dispute or continuously for 70 years? And then they suddenly change it. Why is that? I don't know. I don't know why they suddenly changed it, but suddenly news reports start appearing which start treating UFOs seriously. And I don't know why. It's weird. Does it mean there's going to be some kind of disclosure? Possibly. That's a big subject. I can't go into it in too much detail tonight, but we had this is Lou Elizondo, former intelligence officer. He's on Fox News here, a mainstream program, talking unidentified objects regularly spotted in restricted US Air Force base. They've got straight faces, there's no jokes. And since December 2017, we've had more and more news stories like this for some reason. This could be building us up to some kind of disclosure. Maybe good guys on the inside, the good guys, whoever they are fighting back against the Illuminati, and they've taken control of this whole process, and they're slowly bringing in more and more information so they don't shock us too much. Or it could be a disinformation exercise. Maybe the government they've got some nefarious plan which involves giving out some fake information about UFOs. I don't know the truth. I don't know why. The exopolitical movement is going ahead either way. I know these are there's some good people here. I know some of these people. Steve Bassett's a good friend of mine. But there has been, along with ufology, the study of UFOs, has emerged exopolitics. Exopolitics is basically, it doesn't say, well, what are UFOs? That's what ufology says. It studies them as a scientific phenomenon. Exopolitics says, we know what they are. We know they're not human. Now, what are we going to do about it? In 2013, there was a citizen hearing on ET disclosure. This guy, Stephen Bassett, a splendid individual, organised a hearing, a mock congressional US hearing, with former congressmen and senators, which he brought in, and they carried out a facsimile of a congressional hearing. It was an extraordinary event. And since then, there have been real hearings, which have started, and I don't think they're going to finish. This is odd. This is my personal experience, right? This is weird. Roswell 1947 UFO. Now, I was invited to this. Dave Hodrian. This David Hodrian, he's a ufologist. He actually said, he invited me along as his guest. He said, I've been invited to do a talk at a club, this club in London. Do you want to come along to it? I said, sure. I thought it would be something like a sports and social club in Twickenham or something. It was the In and Out Club in Islington. Prince Charles is a member of that. I went along there and I had to go in through because I wasn't dressed very smartly, you know, so I had to go in through the kitchen. But they'd set up this big theatre, and there were people there, rich people with gold Rolexes, and there were women with diamonds on their ears and their wrists, and they were talking, you know, these weren't a usual UFO conference crowd. And then Dave did his talk. I got in some interesting conversations with some of them, actually. And the In and Out Club, like I said, Prince Charles wasn't there that day, but he's a member. So Prince Philip was as well. This was an elite London club, yet it had a UFO event, a pageant, in which David Hodrian was speaking. Was that some kind of disclosure sales pitch? And I'd somehow managed to get into, thanks to Dave, I somehow managed to get in there through the back door. I don't know, I've written an entire article about this. It's absolutely fascinating. It still baffles me to this day about what actually was going on there, what I actually got involved with. There's no guarantees about how this is going to end. I can't promise you that there's going to be some kind of grand movie like denouement to this story. Things could go badly. We are heading more and more in this direction, the big brother state. There's a trend in politics, in geopolitics in the world today, a tidal set towards greater authoritarianism and internationalism. And that is the reason for this cover-up. That's essentially the fundamental reason for this cover-up is because the capstone, the eye in the capstone, the panopticon wants this kind of world. A world in which there'd be environmental destruction. That the natural world will be destroyed by the abuse of the environment, which is caused by our inability to use this technology. This technology would heal those problems. It would clean the air, it would clean the water. We would no longer be releasing toxic gases into the environment with free energy. Our cities would no longer look like this, burned out rubble, which is what they're increasingly starting to appear like because of the people who feel this, that stress, work, your fear, uncertainty, stress, this misery, this spirit-breaking policy that Andy Thomas talks about is causing us to turn against ourselves. Instead, we could live with free energy, we could live in this kind of world. If Nikola Tesla had been allowed to develop his technology when he did in the late 19th century, we'd be living in this kind of world now. Nikola Tesla instead died. He died in 1943 in a hotel in New York City. He was 77 years old and he was penniless. He was living on canned tuna and tomatoes. He had just enough money for food and his hotel bill, and that was it. Before the undertakers were even allowed into the room to take away his body for burial, the FBI moved in there and they locked the door and they confiscated everything. All his prototypes, all his papers, all his books, all his research, his journals, everything. And that remains classified to this day. The natural world would be safe in a world full of free energy. The kind of destruction we've seen over the last century or more would never have taken place. The whole world could be like that. Free energy could take some of the poorest people in the world and lift them to a standard of living that they've never experienced before. It is possible. Now, don't despair. It's not over yet. We're not in the Big Brother society yet. We can avoid that fate. And there's very, very hopeful signs that we are avoiding that fate. J.R. Tolkien, who was an extraordinary man, he actually had deep spiritual connections, I believed. He was in touch. He was a very, very deep-thinking man, meditative. He had very, very deep connections to spiritual forces working in this universe. He said through his character Gandalf, some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that's not what I have found. I found that it is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay, small acts of kindness and love. And that means nobody is helpless. And he's not the only person who's understood this. Martin Luther King said, this hour in history needs a dedicated circle of transformed non-conformists. Our planet teaches on the brink of annihilation. Dangerous passions of pride, hatred and selfishness are enthroned in our lives, and men do reverence before the false gods of nationalism and materialism. The saving of our world from pending doom will come not through the compliant adjustment of the conforming majority, but through the creative maladjustment of the non-conforming minority. It's essentially saying the same thing as Gandalf. Which means that even if you may feel like you're on your own and you're an oddball and people don't listen to you, your parents think you're crazy and your children think you're crazy, your grandchildren sort of laugh at you, it doesn't matter. You can still have an effect. Oscar Wilde, you've got to laugh at this. Always forgive your enemies because nothing annoys them so much. Oscar Wilde is good. Life is too important to be taken seriously. That's true, Oscar. This guy, Lyle Watson, extraordinary individual. He discovered he did experiments with monkeys that made you may think to yourself, well, only a handful of people understand this stuff. We're only a handful of people in one room. Everyone else is at home watching the TV, being told, being programmed, being brainwashed. But you don't need a majority. Lyle Watson's experiments with monkeys indicated that you only need a very, very small, certain proportion of them. If they learn something, you reach a critical mass, and suddenly that knowledge expands through the Jungian collective unconscious into the entire population. With the monkeys he studied, he reckoned there's about 1%, which is where you get the phrase the 100th monkey. Humans are quite closely related to monkeys. How many people have to realise the truth of this matter before we hit our 100th monkey point? Certainly not the majority. We may be there already. One of you in this room. Tonight, right here, right now, might be the 100th monkey.
He's the guy that wrote the Supernature books.
That's right, yes. Excellent, aren't they? Absolutely excellent. Yeah, and there's some. I've read 3 or 4 of his books. Yeah, when I despair, I remember that all through history, the ways of truth and love have always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible, but in the end, they always fail. Think of it, always. Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "There's a natural arc to the universe, and it bends towards justice." So if you're on the right side, you're on the winning side. And I'll leave you that. I think you take comfort from all this. Don't give up, guys. Everything's going to be fine. Thank you very much. Steve.
I want to challenge you. You actually said, why would they keep it from us intelligent human beings?
Yes.
We're not. We're stupid.
Oh, right.
We have cognitive resonance, cognitive dissonance. We only believe in things that we already believe in. If you manage the media, what happens is, if you tell a lie often enough, people will start to believe it. And the more serious the crime the state commits against the people, the less chance there is of the people believing it was the state that did it. Yeah. We are just puppets. For example, mask mandate. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. Lockdown. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. And all this stuff has been proven to be ineffective and nonsense. And yet we still get fooled into the fact that everybody bends us over when they're told.
Unfortunately, the majority of people, what we describe for the majority of people is absolutely true. There is a minority, though, who who are not, who, I mean, we in this room, you wouldn't be here, Steve, if you were one of these people. None of us in this room would be here if we were one of these people. It's worth bearing in mind that the news media grossly distorted the level of compliance when it came to lockdown mandates. For example, the number of people who took vaccinations, things like that. I mean, for example, they were claiming 90% of people have had a double jab and things like that. But that was actually shown to be false. In Germany, there was up to, I think it leveled off at like 68%, something like that. Now, of course, that is still the majority of people complying, but as Lyle Watson has shown, it doesn't matter if the majority are complying, so long as there's a big enough minority that will not. If the big enough minority do not, sooner or later that's going to have a positive effect, and I hope it does, yeah.
There's another big why. When you said why was it done, why is it kept? Religion. What's happened is, nowhere in the Bible, nowhere in the Quran, nowhere in the Talmud does it mention that there are other beings that God created anywhere else apart from Earth. If it's proven that there were people coming from other places which weren't mentioned in the Bible, how the hell would the Catholic faith explain that way?
I don't think that the Pope or anyone could. I mean, there are people within the church, such as Monsignor Corrado Balducci, he was a Vatican astronomer who actually became a ufologist in later life. However, there is a theological problem associated with that. Now, extraterrestrials are not completely absent from religious doctrine. For example, Islam has something of an open mind, so does Hinduism, in the Abu Dawud Hadith, for example, and in fact through Middle Eastern pre-Islamic traditions, you get the jinn, which are kind of aliens. However, you are right up to a point, and indeed the 1960 Brookings Institute report on the uses and peaceful uses of space made the very same point you're making. How would the church survive? And of course, in the United States, in many other countries, the church is a far more important part of society than it is maybe in Britain and the secular continent. However, the church has survived other things. It survived the blow that Charles Darwin gave it, for example. Now, I sometimes think if it can survive that, it can survive anything. And I suspect it will adapt. It'll change, it'll have to change, it'll have to adapt. The reason, I mean, you're partly right, because you see the officials in the priesthood, they don't like change. Sure, that change is inevitable and change will come, and change will prove to be not as bad as they think it's going to be. But right now, they like stability, they like normality. They are what Robert Anton Wilson called neophobes. They're afraid of anything new. They want things to be as they are.
Also, as well, you mentioned about the capstone. Who are they? If you look at who owns the shares of every single private company, public limited company in the whole world, you will find they are owned by BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, Berkshire Hathaway, and Morgan Stanley. Yeah, and
everything. And they're all related to they're all family. They're all children, grandchildren of Rockefeller, Warburgs. Yeah. There are 13. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It is a family business. We have people like Henry Kissinger in the day's world. There's George Soros, you might have heard of. There's Klaus Schwab, the leader of the World Economic Forum. These are the modern day. These are often quite old people, actually, as well. Henry Kissinger now, he's almost 100. When is that rat going to die? They've been doing this for a long time, so they've been around for a while. Yeah. But thanks for that, Steve. Thanks for the input.
Thank you. Very good.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Questions? Yeah.
Madam.
What do you think about that we've already had in the past free energy here?
I believe that's true. For example, some of the monuments of the ancient world, it's hard to imagine that they were built by any other method unless there was somebody had a way to control gravity, especially in parts of South America. Eric von Daniken, he's an interesting chap. You mentioned earlier the ancient aliens guy, Georgios Tsoukalos, who's now his sort of modern protege, his young protege, has presented a lot of interesting evidence for this. Indeed, in the ancient Egypt, you see the same pattern, which indicates that these people did have actually access to anti-gravity free energy. Yeah.
It was mentioned actually that the way these objects move. So rapid, speed, and all over the place, that nobody could actually survive. in that craft.
You couldn't.
That's like us, couldn't survive.
Well, if you did that with a car, for example, where you were within the same gravitational field as your environment, you couldn't know. The inertia would kill you.
Yeah.
But if you were in, for example, a separate gravitational field, you would basically move with the craft without any inertia. Do you see what I mean? You wouldn't actually feel the movement because you'd be within a separate gravitational field. There'd be a gravitational field essentially pulling you in the opposite direction as the inertia, which would therefore cancel out that effect. But you're right. I mean, one thing Lou Elizondo talks about is the 5 observables, the features of the UAP, as he calls them, unidentified aerial phenomena.
The first hydrogen-powered car came along in 1861.
Was it 1861? I know it was sometime in the 19th century. That's true. Yeah.
These graves, well, I think that's just ones that they could be like not robots, but something like that, because they all look very similar. They all look. And how can you? If you say it has suckers on the end of their fingers, how could they actually make?
Some people speculate because they're sometimes seen working and associated with other beings of a different species. And witnesses often say that the other species seem to be in charge and seem to be giving them orders, as if they're some kind of robot or they're some kind of specially bred biological... yeah, some kind of specially bred domesticated entity designed to obey orders, yeah. They're sometimes described as having very few body features. They don't have genitalia, things like that. They don't have small sense organs, as if they're just like... They roll off a biological production line, for example, and then they just... and then they're just used once and thrown away. I mean, it could be, yeah. Sometimes, yes. It depends who beams me up. If it was the green girl from Star Wars, I'd be very happy. If it's the alien creature from the film Alien, not so much.
Okay, people.
Very good. Thank you very much.
I can see a coffee now, Sami.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks.
I'll come back and do it. Yeah, I can come back and do another talk. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, these books here, Roswell Rising, A Novel of Disclosure, and its 2 sequels, the Roswell trilogy. These books are very, very important because it's basically about the UFO paranormal conspiratorial subjects, but it asks the crucial question: what would happen if we got the truth instead of lies? That question led to a thought experiment, which led to an imaginary scenario, which led to this fictional portrayal of a world in which we did get the truth. How different would it be? How similar would it be? You can find out by reading these books now. £10 at all good bookshops now. Hello everyone, my name's Ben Emlyn-Jones. I'm at the Stape Hill Village Hall in Dorset, and I've just done a talk entitled Roswell Rising. It's about the Roswell incident, free energy, UFOs, and everything associated with them, and its cover-up, and how to end it. And I'm here with Neil Geddes-Ward, host of the Paranormal Peep Show. It's an excellent radio show about all these kinds of subjects as well. I hope you enjoy it. Join Andy and Neil every month on the Paranormal Peep Show, part of the Paranormal UK radio network, for fun, frolics and lots of information about weird stuff, UFOs, ghosts and things that go bump in the night and everything associated with them. Fascinating guests, fascinating talk, fascinating information.
In this way, I'm alright. Yeah. But doing you see something like that.
Hello everyone, welcome to Salisbury. It's another place I've never been to before. It's quite a well-known town in southern Wiltshire. I'm outside of Wetherspoon's pub. I just spent the night here and I've had a wonderful time. It's been a brilliant event. I think I did a pretty good talk. It sort of just flowed naturally from me. They're a lovely crowd at the Dorset Earth Mysteries group. I want to say a big thank you to all of them for hosting me last night. If they ever want me to come back anytime, I'd love to, and they've already suggested I come back maybe next year to do another talk, which I'll be glad to do. Thank you very much to Neil Geddes Ward for recommending me. Thank you to my friends from Wales for coming along. It's really been good to see them, and well, there'll be another video coming very soon. Thank you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Porters, pride and dignity, stop the New World Order.